So IB exams are coming up very soon, and I wanted to do a little video kind of giving some advice on how to best study during this sort of final period right before exams. I know a lot of schools offer like study leave for like a month or two before exams, which my school did. And I remember this being like a very difficult period because you literally have so much freedom in what you're doing, and it's also very important in the sense that you can pretty much turn around your grades just by really focusing and studying hard during this period. So I'm going to be giving some tips specifically targeted towards like the final exams. As always, I have my notes on the side. So this video is going to be a little bit more focused on the approach to studying, or kind of like some study methods and tips rather than the actual like subject content. I've done a few subject specific videos on econ, math, and languages. I've also done videos about like best IB resources, one about mocks, and a bunch of others, so I will link those all below, and you can find them in my IB playlist. So I think most of all, it's really important to remember that it's really not too late. Even if it's only a few weeks before your first exam, it's never too late to turn around your grades. If you've been struggling a lot in a subject up to this point, then really anything can happen. Like if you really focus and concentrate for just a couple weeks, then nothing before this point really matters, because apart from the IAs, like everything else is just up to the final exams. So definitely don't feel discouraged if you've done maybe a little bit worse in a subject up to this point. So my first step is really to make a study plan. So regardless of if there's like 1 week or 1 month left until exams, make some kind of plan as to how you want to organize things. I found this very helpful to kind of keep myself accountable and also break down all of the topics and like everything you have to do, because it is pretty overwhelming to think you have to study for 6 different subjects and like 2 to 3 exams for each. So kind of breaking that down into smaller tasks is really helpful. So what I did was I split my subjects by topic, so like following either the syllabus or my textbook, and then I would allocate like 2 to 3 per day, sometimes a little bit more or less. If you have less time, then obviously you'd want to do more each day. For an example of how this actually looks, you can check out my math video where I go over like a specific example of how I structured my spreadsheet. Another tip that really helped me was trying to get as much as possible done before lunchtime. So regardless of when I woke up, if that was like 7 a.m. or like 10 a.m., I tried to just get something done before lunch. I feel like it depends a bit on the person. Like I know some people are more productive in the evening times, but I really found that getting stuff done in the morning kind of sets you up in like a good tone for the rest of the day. So even if maybe like your afternoon isn't as productive, at least you have like that morning chunk of work that you've already done. Kind of links to like the famous quote of like eat the frog, so doing the most difficult task you have at the start of the day. I know this can feel overwhelming, but literally just doing anything, any small amount of work or like a few questions in the morning. I think you also kind of have to be realistic in terms of how much you're going to be studying, because I feel like the kind of, I guess, image portrayed online in like study tube communities of like waking up at 5 a.m. and studying for like 10-12 hours a day, it is quite unrealistic, and I think for the vast majority of people, that's just not really something you can do sustainably. Just keep in mind that you don't need to do all of that to get a good grade in the end anyway. Obviously, when it comes to some subjects where you need to do a lot of practice questions, then doing that will have helped. But at the same time, I know for a fact I did not do like 12-hour days, and I still turned out fine for my exams. But even just getting a little bit done each day really does add up. I'd also suggest taking the time to find the best locations and times for you to study. So I found that like going to a specific library or a specific cafe kind of just like mentally associates that place with studying and makes you like more productive. A good way to do this is literally just reflecting on like what has and hasn't worked for you so far. Now, having done like basically 2 years of IB, think about what kinds of tests you did better on, what subjects you found easier, and maybe why you found those easier or better for you, and maybe like if that had anything to do with your approach or the way you studied for those. Next tip is to track your studying. I know some people might be a bit against this, but I personally found this so helpful. So there's so many apps you can use online. I personally used Study Bunny when I was in IB, and I know Flora or like Forest is also a good one, but finding a way to kind of document how much you're doing each day helps you, first of all, actually get things done. Because if I had seen that like, okay, it's Monday today, last Monday I did 4 hours of work, this Monday I've only done 2. That might motivate me to do like a little bit more just to cross what I had done the week before. I know there's some apps where you can like add your friends on there as well, and there's like leaderboard and stuff. I think Flora does that, but I personally just liked doing it for myself, so the only kind of comparison I had was like to the amount I did yesterday. If you can split it up by subject as well, that's really helpful to kind of visually see where your time is going and what you're spending more time on. So I know there's like kind of 2 main ways to go about studying. You can either do like really focused blocks of work, kind of like deep work, and have like no distractions on the side, just like really be productive for that time, and then have like your rest separate. Or you can kind of maybe do like longer hours that are like less focused, so maybe you're like listening to music or watching Netflix on the side, so you're kind of taking longer to ultimately complete the same amount of work. And I know the first method is like more conventional like study advice that you should follow, but I actually ended up finding that the second method worked way better for me. So even if I was spending way longer to do the same amount of work, I was ultimately getting the work done, and I feel like it would have been a lot harder for me to do it the first way, just because of like the kind of like mental resistance and like how difficult it can be to just like be super focused like that. So it's really up to you. I obviously like I don't want to recommend like doing kind of half distracted work, but that is a big part of how I was able to do days that were like 7, 8, 9 hours. I wasn't like fully focused for those hours, but like ultimately helped me get done whatever I had allocated to that day. In terms of actual study methods, I'd really recommend active recall methods. So this is probably something you've heard of a lot if you're like into these like study videos, but it basically has to do with, rather than just like passively reading the information, you're trying to actually recall it from your memory. I've talked about this a bit before, but there's honestly so many good videos about this online. For a specific method on how you can exactly do this, I go over it in my math video again, where I used kind of like a spreadsheet to track when I had last studied each topic and when I had like last done my active recall. So you can try something like that. There's more details in that video. So once I had a general understanding of like 60 to 75% of the content, I would just try to focus on more active methods after that. Obviously it is a little bit of a balance, because you can't just jump right into doing past paper questions before you even know the content. So I'd say kind of try to split your time a little bit between those. Obviously you're going to be prioritizing the subjects that are your HLs, also the ones where you have the exams coming up soonest. In terms of the actual revision sessions as well, I found that different subjects do require very different methods, which is something you probably already know from taking 6 subjects for like 2 years now. So for more like STEM type of HL, so like I did math HL, I would pretty much just follow that method of like going over a topic and like getting kind of comfortable with it and then doing questions related to it. I also think it's really important to keep in mind that you don't necessarily just need to do past paper questions, because I know there's so much emphasis on doing as many past papers or as many years worth as you can, but even doing any kind of practice questions helps. Like I used so much Revision Village. I know they like came out with an app now, which is so crazy to me, and they have like literally every subject on there, but in my IB days we only had math, and they were like kind of launching the sciences. But that is a really great resource. And there's also like obviously questions in your textbook, which I actually did find quite helpful, at least before moving on to past papers. But of course the benefit of past papers is that they're going to be most similar to the actual exam. On the other hand, for more like essay based or like writing type of subjects, so like my other HLs were econ and English, and for those I found that I kind of had to spend more time on content, or like on my actual like exam technique and approach. So for instance, for econ, like you need to dedicate a lot of time to learning the diagrams and the models, and for English, like there's a lot of focus on like the literary features and like being able to identify those. So I definitely did a bit of experimenting to figure out what was actually most effective for each subject, and also making sure that I was only learning what I actually needed to learn. So I'd make sure that I was sticking very close to the syllabus. For instance, I know for some subjects, like the topics that we learned towards the end of the year were kind of rushed in class just because we didn't have as much time to go over them. So making sure that I still like revise those topics, because obviously they could come up on the exam. And at the same time, like making sure that you're using like the most updated syllabus and you're not learning things that you don't need to learn, because that would obviously be pointless. Lastly, of course, finding ways to de-stress and maintain a balance outside of studying. So it's really important that you don't kind of get wrapped up in just studying 24/7, because obviously that does get very exhausting, and you want to make sure you're not super burnt out before exams actually start. I started going to the gym like a couple times per week when I was in IB, and just doing even like a quick workout was really helpful, or even like still making time for your friends and family, and like keeping up with any other hobbies or things that you like to do. I think it's very important to not make your entire life revolve around IB, because like ultimately your main goal is only really to achieve your university requirements, and anything past that is just like a bonus. That leads on to my next few tips, which are going to be a little bit more focused on like mindset and motivation, because I do think a big part of doing well in your exams is also in like your mindset and the way you approach studying. So going back to university, I think this was probably like my biggest motivation. Like if I ever felt too lazy to study something, or like I didn't want to do a difficult topic, I would really just think about how I needed to meet my university requirements, and kind of like that fear is what got me to study a lot of the time. I think having a specific goal like that to work towards was something that did help me. Obviously it is very stressful, because I know at the time it is very scary knowing that basically these few exams are going to determine what university you go to, if you are choosing to go to university. But I think trying to kind of spin that into a positive way for yourself, which obviously sounds a lot easier than it is, but I try to use that as like kind of motivation for myself. I feel like my tripod is so unstable today, so sorry if I keep shaking. I recently posted a video with some tips on how to motivate yourself to study, so definitely check that out, especially if you're having trouble with just like that first bit of getting started. Also keep in mind that any little bit of work you do right now is such a huge favor to your future self, because I know the night before your first IB exam is like honestly so stressful and really scary, but I think at the end of the day, knowing that I had done as much as I could, knowing that I had still put in effort, even if I maybe did have some unproductive days or some days where like I barely got any work done, at least knowing that I had committed to still studying sometimes even if I didn't feel like it, and I still actually like put in effort, that did help kind of give me some peace of mind before those exams. So yeah, those are my tips on how to kind of navigate this last period of IB. Ultimately, like no matter what kinds of study hacks or tips or shortcuts you're using, you do need to put in work. Like I said before, not to like stress you out too much, but this is like a very important part of IB. I think one good thing is knowing that like you can influence your final outcome here. So unlike things like the IAs where maybe it was like a bit more subjective, the final exams and studying for it is really all down to you. But do keep in mind that obviously IB isn't everything, and once you meet your university requirements, like that's literally it. Like I said, like you don't need to get 45, and just know that you will thank yourself later for studying. I think knowing now that I got into the university that I wanted to and I got a score that I was happy with honestly makes me so thankful for my past self, and kind of just think about that feeling on results day and whether what you're doing right now is kind of aligning towards getting there. So yes, those are all my tips. If you have any other questions, then comment them down below as always. But yeah, that is all for today.